All right, so we've got a terrific conversation ahead. So Robin, first, let's get you guys introduced to the audience. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your background, and then Mazern will go to you next.
Perfect. So lovely to meet you all. I'm Robin Sutar. I'm the field CTO at Databricks. Interestingly, I think I spend most of my time on the road. We were just talking about I probably traveled 315 days last year. My role is really helping organizations figure out how are they going to execute their data strategy at scale. How do you actually take that and make sure that you can bridge it across your organization? It's not just the technology, but also people, process, organizational design, change management. I've been in this role for about 3 years. I did a year and a half in London in the UK, year and a half now based out of the Seattle area, covering all of the Americas as well as Europe still. Prior to Databricks, I spent 23 years with Microsoft, where I was Chief Data Officer of Microsoft UK, as well as the Chief Operating Officer of Azure Data Engineering. So long career and tenure in technology.
Really excited to have your insight and perspective here. And Mazern, I'd love to hear from your background and some of the amazing things that you've been working on as well.
All right. So I'm founder and CTO of SportLogic, and this company has been around for 10 years, give or take. Not the biggest sport analytics company in the world, not the smallest. We are about like 100 people. We've been at the forefront of AI technology for visual perception, all sorts of content creation. Before this whole generative AI hype, we've been doing sport analytics for hockey, football, and recently soccer. We are the dominant data provider for teams, media broadcasters in hockey, for the NHL, all other minor leagues, all European leagues, and yes, we are Canadian, we love hockey.
That's good for our audience here today in Toronto. And Shakti, tell us a little bit about your background and about Canada Helps as well.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm a CTO with Canada Helps. It's been almost 4.5 years. And Canada Helps, at Canada Helps, we provide fundraising support to close to 80,000 plus charities and 100,000 plus donors all across Canada. That's like instant fundraising, instant checking out, instant event, or instant P2P services, as well as the instant ticket receipt generation. My role there are primarily 4 key areas which I'm responsible for. One is more towards the marketing, product, and the sale conglomeration. And the second key area is being a CTO, keeping a track of how we are moving with the technology, what their technical depth that we have grown, because Canada Helps is more than 25-year-old company. Multiple chefs came in with the best of the intent. Right now, the challenge or the interesting part is, how can we scale further, how can we become more reliant, how become more resilient. And the last but not the least area is more toward the pre-sales and the post-sales consulting, reaching out to our customer, which in this case are donors and charity, helping them with integration of the new tool so that they can focus on their key business area, which is a fundraising. My background, worked with Apple, IBM, TCS for good 16 years. And in the last 9 years, I made an intentional move to start supporting the fintech space, focusing on the organizations which are going through the different growth phase, either going through the seed funding to scale stage. What are the challenges that they are facing, and how can I add value there, the learning that I had while working with a bigger organization.
Thank you all so much for sharing your expertise so our audience can see exactly where you're coming from and your perspective here as well. So let's really just get into this. You just talked about this. Tech debt and innovation. So Robin, I'll have you sort of kick off this part of the conversation for us. We've heard a lot about the challenges and struggle when it comes to scaling up. So how do you actually make decisions when to take on tech debt versus when to actually invest in long-term architectural changes?
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting conversation, particularly in the age of Gen AI right now. I think every board and CEO is having exactly this conversation. How much technical debt do we currently have in the environment? How do we actually push the pace of innovation, and where are we going to pivot our resources to be able to do both at some sort of capacity? I think it's so funny because when I left Microsoft after 20 years and went to Databricks, I said I was leaving a structured company to go to a startup, and now people laugh because it's 9,000 plus employees, and I still view it as very much a startup. let me maybe give a little bit of perspective on how at Databricks we have approached innovation versus the technical debt, because we are an 11-year-old company. So there is some level of debt that we're having to go back and clean up. I think we're in a fortunate position that we are still a privately held company, and so 33% of every dollar of revenue goes back into R&D, which I think is pretty high and pretty significant for the market today compared to what the numbers I had at Microsoft, which were not that high.
Yeah.
Right, how much money you could actually put into it. So we really had to start to think about how much were we going to go back to make sure that the platform and the fundamentals were in a position that would allow us to continue at the pace of innovation. But we also have a CEO who is very much a PhD academic who says, now that technology is changing, where can we make sure that we have the fundamentals and foundations in place, but where would we disrupt? If we could do it differently and we weren't trying to clean up existing technical debt, but we would recreate. And I think that's a really interesting perspective when you start to have that conversation with the board to say, yes, there is some level of fundamentals and foundations that we need in place. We need basics like security, governance, controls, right policy. All of those things need to be met. But at the same token, what is our risk appetite to be able to pivot and not necessarily invest in technical debt that will be irrelevant in a year from now? And so really having to go through and build out those frameworks and those foundations to know what is the appetite. And I have to say, speaking with so many customers, it will vary depending on how regulated your industry is. What is if you're public versus private, right? How the largeness of your scale, whether you're a digital native and startup and you have very little technical debt that you have to deal with, you can push the pace of innovation much, much more quickly. If you are doing things that are not PII data sort of driven use cases, your pace for innovation can be much faster. So thinking about what are the things that really matter for the organization. And then I think the other recommendation is bring your CISO and your legal and risk and compliance offices with you. Right? Because there will always be the business that wants to push the pace of innovation, and you will always have the risk aversion. I'm a lawyer too by education, so I can say this. Those lawyers, right, really want to keep you, they want to minimize the risk for the organization. And so establish the principles that are appropriate based on the organization and the maturity of where you are, and where can you start to push some of the boundaries.
Shakti, you just talked about you had just talked about some of the struggles that you kind of stepped into as well when it comes to dealing with technical debt and trying to operate in a growth phase. Talk to me a little bit about your perspective there and anything that you'd like to add from what Robin just said as well.
Yeah, it comes back to not just the technical debt. If we combine it all, it becomes a product debt actually. So that's the key area which we need to understand. Most of the organization where I work with, it's become a us versus them kind of mindset where the product is a separate silo and the tech is a separate company. Anything which is the building block for the product is technology. And if technology is constantly creating those debt, it will have an impact on the product. And if it has an impact on the product, it will automatically translate into sales, and that will automatically reflect into our P&L, our business. So it's more towards the storytelling and getting the buy-in from all the key departments, whether it's the board of director or executive or your product and engineering. So that's the one way, the way I like to address. And the second key area, which Robin mentioned, is understanding the risk framework. It's very important to understand what kind of risk appetite that we have. Is it something which we are going through the risk mitigation strategy or something which we can prolong this? But how long is that timeline that we need to assess? It's again, I always emphasize on it's nothing like product versus technology. It's a one organization and a one framework. If there is a mismatch, either of them, it might not work because it will automatically impact on the sprint cycle, deliveries, the qualities. So it's not too good.
I think there's an interesting point though on the product because coming from a legacy organization like Microsoft, I know there were often times where we looked and said, I don't know that we moved as fast as we should have in de-investing in product where we were continuing to inherit debt versus focusing on the innovation. And so sometimes there is I know you guys really love that product a lot, but we have to repivot our resources, right, to think about innovation. And sometimes that's a hard conversation.
That's a very hard conversation, and sometimes it's not even easy to put like ROI as because it's all about speculation. Like your current product is working, you are generating revenue, And then anything, any replatforming, anything new, like there is a risk. There's risk associated to that. And it's like, it's a matter of like, to me, it's an art kind of to come up with ROI for something that no one knows really like how much advantage it will give you. Because like anything we do today, like I'm a builder, like my background is like PhD computer science. So any single line of code that I write, I know this is going to be technical debt. The moment I commit the code, it is technical debt. I'm adding it to the pile of debt we have. And it's true for any organization at any size. Like we are way smaller than like this giant startup. We call Databricks a startup, but still like today, like dealing with a lot of tech debt. And as you said, Robin, like it's all about like kind of the risk and also figuring out the risk appetite. Like sometimes we want to go fast, like business wants always to go fast, and like executives want to go with the next thing. I was like, why don't we go with all these new fancy AI stuff? It's like, our data is not set up for that. Our data framework is not going to support this new Gen AI, for example. And replatforming might not be the solution, because when we replatform today, it might not be the solution for the day after. Like things change quite quickly.
Yeah, that's a great point. And those are the really difficult conversations to have, right? Shakti, I'm going to have you kind of tackle this question, because I know, Marsan, you did mention this. It's about building versus buying. For a lot of companies trying to figure this out, how do you actually evaluate what to develop in-house versus saying, you know what, they've already done it, maybe we can just look at buying and integrating? How much is that actually going to cost? And also not just the money factor, but also the manpower to integrate and actually get people to you know, be comfortable with the product.
Yeah. So there are multiple factors, but as long as your thought process is, it goes to the one goal, which is there should be cash flow. You know, because you are there to to run the product, sell the product for your customers. There has to be a cash flow. Now, if I go back and how to find a balance, build versus buy, it goes back to what strategic value proposition that is required for this, whatever you are going to build versus buy. If it is something which is very niche, very unique product that will require more customization as per your organization, I'll definitely go for the build. The reason is we will have more control over it. We will have more customization, and at least my team, the team of developer and engineer, they feel proud that they actually built something which is really adding value. However, when I have to go for more towards like the HR system or other product which might not require more maintenance or more customization, probably going with the buy approach is good. So that goes back to our strategic value proposition. The second part is, again, how much time does it take? If I come back and recently we launched, of course, entire industry is dealing with the fraud mechanism right now. The way we are progressing in Gen AI or the LLM advancement, the same thing, we are not able to cope up with the fraud, the fraudster as well, or card testing attack on any of the website, which is causing some of the folks, they are trying their best to steal the PII, or some of the folks just for the fun try to put the system down. How we can build up an entire system in-house, in phase-wise, in the incremental way, so that we can mitigate that kind of risk. Do we need any kind of authorization engine in-house? Can we build it up so that we'll have more control, more customized, we can assess the data? So that's why I decided to build it in-house rather than going with with the buy approach.
Yep. That's a valid point. Like that's a great point. Like kind of time to market, and if there's something that is already there that can give you the advantage, and you can kind of take the market, go with a new product, disrupt the market, do that. But there's always the part about like developers and the builders and kind of the team morale. And I kind of felt it because like we started to do some acquisitions. Like we acquired the first company in UK in November. So everyone, like for a while, the whole culture in the team, and since we were kind of at the forefront of AI development, there was no off-the-shelf solution. There was nothing. Everything was developed like we are not a fan of reinventing the wheel, but we had to come up with solutions. But kind of changing that mindset, everyone understands, every single developer understands, like there should be cash flow, like these are financial decisions, it makes a lot of sense, but still they want to own something, they want to build something, they want to feel that they are contributing to the success of the business, and kind of balancing that team morale when you are buying versus building, like you have to really consider that human element.
At Microsoft, we had to actually create the principles up front to say what were the minimum threshold and criteria that if it met those, we would buy versus build. Otherwise, they would want to build everything because they're engineers, right? But if I think about it, there are sometimes the opportunity where you think of, we need to solve a problem because the market hasn't solved for it. So for example, Microsoft Purview was very much originally a first-party solution for Microsoft to solve for GDPR internally, and then it ultimately built into a third-party product. So, right, really, because we had the criteria ahead of time to say, okay, it doesn't exist, we can't figure out how to solve internally for Microsoft on how we're going to solve for GDPR, build something, and then ultimately you could lead to monetization. So I think, right, making sure that you have those criteria up front, otherwise, I mean, I know that team of 5,000, they would build everything and just not use anything off the shelf.
At all. Yeah.
Speaking about criteria, yes, it works for kind of a scale of Microsoft, but for a scale I'm operating in, is like we are a bit small to have all the policies, but we are not too small to have no policy, because it's kind of not like a Wild West, but it's kind of that chaotic stage that is not easy.
You had just mentioned that time to market is obviously a very important consideration and to consider versus build versus buy, but also the expertise that you have in-house. And then including the point that you made about having teams that are going to want to own a piece of something, but you also have your day-to-day operations. You also have things to maintain. So how much of your team can actually handle innovating and building something if they also have their actual current products to maintain for customers as well as a consideration, right? That's something that has consistently come up when it comes to scaling like organizations. The next question we're going to dive into is scaling with data strategies. So Robin, what are some of the most critical data infrastructure challenges that you're seeing companies face when it comes to transitioning from that startup mode and then scaling for growth?
Yeah, a lot of it is that sort of technical debt that you inherit. I think it's interesting that in startup mode, everybody very much is like trying to do the right thing for the business to grow as quickly as possible and to monetize against the product that you're building. But what often happens then is you now have duplication of efforts across the organization. So let me give you the example of Azure Data. We had 27 product lines. Those product lines actually competed with each other, right? If I think about it, we had SQL Server on-prem, but then we had 12 different flavors of Azure SQL. I still have stock in Microsoft. I love the company, so continue to use Azure. But right, it was very much like, how do we make sure that we're rationalizing all of these products? Like you're all trying to solve the same problem, that it ultimately ended up in internal competition among our own products. Across the organization. And so it really took that, how do we work with the people, because it's very much people developing these, to go through to rationalize to say, how much is this a technical debt that we want to inherit versus how much are we impacting our own capability to monetize because we're not rationalizing the efforts that it takes. And I know there were multiple times over the years where we sort of pulled back to say, how much of this can we extract to say it's horizontal and common to all of them in engine work, tools, or operational sort of capabilities versus net new innovation on top of the product. And that requires, I think, looking at the maturity of the organization to say how much of that do we want to continue to stay distributed versus what do we want to centralize? But I think lots of organizations continue to struggle as you get to the size and scale that you really have to take a look at it and say, okay, this is costing us too much money. We have too many resources that are working on solving for the same problems and products. And so how are we going to start to bring them together? I mean, Azure is a great example of that. That thing is just a beast, right? And so it's very much broken up by networking, storage, data, right? There were all these sort of different, but there's so much integration. So how do you start to build operational rigor around making sure that the teams are actually working toward that common goal and objective of delivering quality products for customers without sort of that duplication of resources working on the same problem? And so I think it is looking at the maturity of the organization and rethinking not just the product strategy, but what is the operations strategy, what is the people strategy, to make sure that you're thinking of that as you continue to grow, so that you can continue to scale at the pace that you want to.
And Marcin, your organization is very heavy into data and analytics, and so just by the nature of what First Logic does, you just mentioned that you've gone through some mergers and acquisitions. How does the data strategy work there when it's coming from, essentially scaling and growing, but also integrating new companies and orgs into this? What has been your experience and any recommendations?
Okay, so that's quite interesting because it's been 6 months or more that we did the acquisition. That company, great product, great success in the market, brilliant team, but the whole data strategy, the whole data infrastructure, completely different. And now I'm looking at the product lines we have. We have products that are kind of overlapping with each other. We have different data infrastructure. I have different teams maintaining both. It's costing me, but I'm looking at, okay, now is the time, shall I start to consolidate, or shall I put effort to add features, go with new products, and accelerate expanding into the market? So again, it becomes kind of the strategic decision for the business. And what we've chosen so far, we keep maintaining both. We don't integrate, we don't consolidate yet, until the pain is too much.
Until the pain is too much. Okay, that's the threshold there.
No, everything has a dollar value.
No,
everything has a financial value, and also sometimes kind of first mover advantage is good. We are entering into the soccer market. Soccer is a recent sport for us. In hockey, we have the dominant presence of 10 years, but soccer, we have to move fast. We have to do consolidation in the market. We have to and these kind of pains will happen. We have another company under LOI right now. We are doing due diligence. So I expect the integration work, and maybe we'll end up with 10 different products, more or less doing the same thing, 10 different infrastructure in about 3 years from now, and then that will be the time to kind of reduce the cost of operation and deal with the tech debt.
I think this is where, though, your risk versus innovation, how much risk does it represent to the organization not to have a common governance platform, or that you're copying data from one system to the other because you're trying to actually innovate on these multiple data sets? At what point is that risk more costly than the investment that it would take to do the consolidation or the simplification? I always love when everybody said, when the Azure first came out or the cloud first came out, everybody said, we're going to move everything, we're going to move all data to the cloud. And it's now I'm talking to customers and they're saying, oh my God, that OpEx expense is so high. How do we really have to move everything? How are we thinking about things like our data retention strategy, our consolidation strategy, real time, despite what the business says, not everything has to be real time. And so how do you start to have those conversations so that you're really thinking about what is your data strategy look like today, and what does it look like over time? Because it will change as you do mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, the organization grows, you add incremental products. So making sure that your data strategy is a living, sort of breathing document as you go on this growth journey as the organization, I think is so critical.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions. I'd love to get some audience questions and get you guys to actually interact as well. So first question, what's an interesting or helpful pattern you've used to help drive culture change as the organization scaled up? We kind of touched upon a little bit of this, but Shakti, I know with you coming into Canada Help, that's been something that you've been trying to kind of drive, because it's been around, but it is still in a growth sort of phase as you're trying to innovate.
Yeah. So it's a big word, actually, when we touch on culture. every organization, they go through these kind of challenges, whether it's a large organization, because whenever we are developing a new product, whether it's a Fortune 500 companies or the companies who are at the growth stage, it's very important to get the buy-in, as I mentioned earlier, not just from the executive and the board, but most important from your junior team member as well. Unless and until they do not believe in what you want to do, whether on the technology side or product side, probably they won't be able to giving their what is required to perform this activity. And it's more about having a regular conversation and trying to make them understand why we are doing for what we are doing. So whether in terms of what advantages that we are getting, whether it's a monetary value, or what value will it provide to the customer who are going to use it. Great example. Whenever we are doing the customer onboarding, when I joined, it took about 367 or 65 days, about a good 1 year, to have a sales lead generation, all the way to the training, creating their use cases, and then all the way to onboarding. The first thing which I saw it as an opportunity, how we can automate this onboarding, so that the sales can start doing their work. In the meantime, do we have the right kind of steps in place where we can automate it? For the developer, it's as simple as writing a user story and getting the code done. But it's very important to let them understand how will it add value to the customer. The customer who was struggling for the last more than 1 year, now they are going to be start using our product in less than a month time. So having that understanding is really important. And the second part is creating an openness. So we have noticed in the last, I would say, 10 years, more towards the influencer, and people are becoming more open. They want to get involved. They want their voices to be heard, rather than getting their work done. Somebody is directing them. No. So it's all about more collaboration and making them feel they are part of the team. And you being fully transparent, not to drive it like something which is strategy. You have to do it, but give them a platform to voice their concern. Why we are doing it? What are the challenges that you see? Come up with your ideas. That's one way on the team side I look at it. Onto the cross-team collaboration, which goes back to my peers like CMO and the COO, it's also very important to have those regular dialogues with them as well, because it's very important. They are the one who are facing the customer, not the technology team, right? So for us, the customer is CMO as well as the COO, not the direct customer. So having that dialogue, having that customer, build up a positive culture across the organization. That's how I look at it.
I think the interesting part sometimes, though, is making sure that everybody's super clear on the North Star of the organization, or the mission or goal of the organization. So for example, when I joined Microsoft in the late 90s, the mission was a PC on every desktop, right? If you were to ask my kids what a PC is, they would have no concept what that was. I think if you look at the cultural shift that Microsoft underwent when Satya Nadella took over as CEO, it was very much about changing the mission of the organization. He changed it from a PC on every desktop to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And everybody in the company could tell you exactly how their role contributed to that, how it was going to help organizations do that, whether they were in product development or operations or sales or services. It didn't matter, everybody. And I think public sector customers do this phenomenally well. Like, as much as in the US we hate the IRS, everybody at the IRS can tell me exactly what their mission is. Everybody at the UK Department of Education can tell me exactly what their mission is. And they all know the technology that they're building, the products that they're delivering, the service that they're providing, how it attributes to that mission. And I think, right, it is sometimes, we think people get it, but I think being really, really clear and succinct on this is the mission, goal, and objective of the organization. It's to make a profit, yes, but what is the underlying North Star of what we're trying to achieve?
It's always underrated, like the mission, the vision, and like what this organization is really trying to do. Like everyone wants to make money, but it's not about money. Like we are solving something, like we are creating a value, and it has to be communicated over and over and over again. Like every single employee has to understand that, and it evolves over time. The companies are not static, dynamic. It changes as we grow.
So,
communication is key.
Listen, I'm a former corporate comm, so yes, I agree. Fully, yes. North Star communication is key. Get everyone aligned. So there were 3 questions here that I'm going to kind of combine. One of them mentioned how do you get stakeholder buy-in, I believe, in reinvesting in essentially like investing technical debt and like making sure that it helps product development. And there was this other one here that says, what methods and models do you use to find the right balance between tech debt and new product development? So I'll let whoever wants to kind of tackle that. How do you get buy-in or convince the stakeholders that actually we do need to take on this debt because it is going to help with product development or invest in building this out?
There are similar, like in product development, like we have like the standard methodologies for intake process, basically. So kind of there is a value, there is effort, like like what you are going to bring to the organization by adding these features or going with these products. You can do something similar. There are similar frameworks for tech debt because like every tech debt like either enables you to create a new product or at some point reduces kind of the maintenance or support, and it's like then there's always something financial attached to it. There are some intangibles like risk, but at the end you can always play with this, and then when you're talking to your other executives, everyone understands numbers. And as long as you provide numbers and compare things against each other, then you can make a case to go with either a tech debt or new features.
Yeah, I think for technologists, though, we tend to talk technology, and we lean toward the features, like, oh, you have to get rid of that technical debt because feature X. And the business looks at you and says, I don't care, right? And so how do you do that translation layer, I think is a skill that comes over time. Like, how do I translate this into, and Databricks sellers are infamous for this, right? They will sit down and do a comparison of feature function of every product in comparison, and sometimes it's like, okay, take it back. Like you're talking to head of a supply chain. What do they care about? How are you going to help them break down those barriers? And I think the minute we can get rid of technical debt because we've translated it into incremental business value in business terms, I think you overcome a lot of that stakeholder buy-in, because then they're the ones who hold the money most often on the P&L. And so getting them to actually make the investment of getting rid of that technical debt requires translating it into cost savings, right? Revenue generation. Like there's something that they care about that you need to be able to do that translation. And we can all celebrate on the backside with all the great technical capabilities that it's going to bring. But I find that if you cannot do that translation layer, it's a lost cause.
And if you do the translation right, business people get it, and my COO completely understood the need to re-platform one of our AI processing services, and he kept asking developers how are we making progress? And it's he got so much into it, and then he saw the results, and it's so if the translation is right, people get it, people see the value for the business, and we have to translate everything to the business terms, as you said.
Go ahead.
Sorry. It becomes a touchy topic the moment you mention the technical debt. People they frown. So it's very important to have a strong team with you as well. Your engineers and your architect, and constantly improvise and think around if we have a certain product feature that needs to be developed. What is the backbone we need to touch base on? Definitely not touching the entire transaction engine, which is the key part of every organization, if we are in the payment space, but start touching the smaller area, which we found is the low-hanging fruits, right? They are like the receipt generation, like the login framework. There are multiple areas where you might find it, and start touching those areas. So because you cannot just take up the entire technical debt and it can get it done in a year or 6 months. It will take some time, but having that regular dialogue and kind of having that trade-off. We are not going to touch or recompile the entire thing. It will be just one-on thing. Since we are on that particular area, we are going to improve this particular. We are going to launch this product feature A. This particular area is touching this particular code. We have an opportunity to not only just for improving the code, but also automate it as well. So that will add more value once you think around the go-to-market strategy, less business issues, less escalations. So these things really help.
Thank you guys for the questions, and keep them coming. Marsan, I actually wanted to chat with you a little bit because you had a really terrific story about some of the challenges that you've gone through, which I think will be great learning experience for our audience on what to think about when it comes to expanding into new regions. What sort of considerations? I'd love to hear you share about your story and your learnings.
Right. So it starts by understanding what the core competencies of your organization is. And for us, we've been doing AI data collection, processing, so a little bit of background. We take any video from any sport game, and we do all sort of player metrics extraction from videos. So we are very good at doing visual perception, AI to generate content metrics, and so on. And we had a very strong relationship with all hockey teams. Everyone loves hockey in Canada, and we are at the forefront of hockey. But when it came about expansion to other sports like soccer, we didn't have the greatest network in Europe. There are so many leagues out there, so many soccer leagues, and there are many kind of apps that people are building for organizations, but it's they lack the big part that is kind of data. And we said, okay, we can take the same approach as hockey. We can build everything ourselves, build a sales team, have boots on the ground, and then deal with all these kind of leagues and clubs ourselves. But too much effort, and there are already players in that space that need something that we have. So kind of rather than doing that, we started to do partnership, strategic investments in some companies. Also, we started to acquire organizations for the business relationships they have or the tools and products they have, and then started to inject our technology into that. So it came down to what we are good at and what we are not good at. And sometimes it's a difficult question to ask because no one wants to say we are not good at X, Y. Every organization wants to be good at everything. But the truth is that we have limited resources. We are only good at few things. And we have to focus on the things that we have the core expertise.
Yeah, and scaling up in different regions is a completely different
Completely different.
You've got to quite literally do a whole market landscape and see what you're saying, who are those players there. I'd love to hear your perspective. Do you have anything else to add to what it takes to actually expand into new regions, some of the compliance issues even that you're thinking about with data strategies? I know we talked a little bit about GDPR, but when you're looking at expanding into regions that do have data restrictions and compliance in place.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's sort of the data sovereignty issues, there's data residency issues. Right now, the big conversations are AI regulatory and legislative requirements, which we don't even know what those look like. I think, right, the EU has the EU AI Act. Nobody knows how that's going to be enforced or how it's going to be translated. UK, I was super fortunate to land in the country the week of Brexit and had no toilet paper for 2 weeks during lockdown. But now they're trying to say, okay, what impact does that have? How are we going to create our own EU AI Act? The US, who the heck knows what's going on? I can say this because I'm an American. Who the heck even knows what's going on south of the border, right? What's good or what's not good? I think lots of the conversations we're having are how do we focus on the fundamentals? Things like traceability, explainability, transparency. There will be fundamental requirements, same as there were for GDPR, right? And so can we focus on what are those fundamental requirements and make sure that as we think about our product development, as we think about how we're servicing, that we're set up for that? Because I do think any organization that waits for legislation and regulation to be in place and demonstrated enforcement, you will be left behind, right? The market will leave you behind. And so how do you make sure, again, with the risk versus innovation, how do you make sure that you are creating your products in a way that are enough that you are mitigating the risk appetite of the organization while still allowing you the base to innovate? And I think it is breaking it down to those fundamental components that have to be there, where your legal department, your CEO, your board are all comfortable with sort of the risk that represents for the organization, and that you are covering yourself as well as possible to be able to deliver against those objectives.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to basic RACI matrix, trying to understand who is your data consumer, who is the data user, and who is the data regulator. Because in every country, in every region, there are different kind of rules. I mean, last year or year before that, Quebec Law 25, which has been implemented, and it was like, we have to do something. Even though we have got thousands and thousands of charity data, some of them are PII in a different environment. Well, we have to obfuscate the data. That means in the last 9 years or 7 years, if somebody is not using your platform, you have to make sure their data is obfuscated. That's an interesting problem. But at the same time, when you're speaking with marketing, they would like to reach out to those customers because once back in 2003, 2004, they once used it. Now we have to deal with it. Number one, we have to obfuscate the data, put it outside our system. At the same time, we want to send the promotional email as well. So that's where these strategy around where the data should be resided, what will be the structure, and then identifying your data user, data consumer, and data regulator. And last but not the least, definition of done is very important. When you're saying that, okay, this data is now going to be whether on the reporting server or on OLTP or OLAP, whichever structure that we're going at, for this particular project when you are doing, what's the first milestone definition of done, that you have achieved it. Now from here, you have to move to the next level. So these are the things which is really important, especially when you're dealing with the data.
Yeah. We've got about 3 minutes left. I'm going to try to get a couple more questions in. What is your technology consideration of scale up with DevOps and shift down with platform engineering? Who wants to tackle that? Shakti?
Yeah, sure. So for DevOps, the good part about DevOps is number one, they are not facing product. They are not facing any external team. So they have got the flexibility to do a lot of work. If you try to divide the entire engineering team or the technology team, we have got the front end, back end, senior developer, principal engineers, QAs, and the product. But the DevOps is usually they are behind the scene, keeping a track of the security, scaling up, scaling down, automation using Terraform and whatnot. The good part is, always finding out the right and the sweet spot, the ratio of the work that your developers are doing, that will be supported by how many DevOps. So it's like it's not something which is industry standard. It goes back to organization by organization. If there are 4 to 5 engineers, probably 1 DevOps would be sufficient enough, so that he or she could or they could start planning out how many sites do we need, what level of automation do we need. I'm not going to get into a tool like Jenkins and Terraform, etc. But if I compare the business or the quantity of work that the rest of the team are doing, comparatively for the DevOps, it becomes more independence for them to start thinking around the security, scalability, more optimization, more query optimization, etc. So it's finding out that right sweet spot, like what level of support is required on the given day of the deployment, or if we are moving towards the compliance side, which is a PCI compliance, then it becomes quite a hefty ask. Recently, we moved from PCI 3.8 to 4.0. That means we need to become more proactive. That means whatever we are suggesting to the external auditor, it is actually in place. That's where the DevOps work become more heavily around 365 days.
All right, we've got about 30 seconds left. I want to, one, give a shout out to the person who said that I've been recently promoted to a product leadership position, so a round of applause. What is one challenge I should focus on to help my organization scale? 18 seconds. I know we can maybe fudge this a little bit, but what's one challenge, Shakti?
Talk to customer, talk to customer, talk to customer. That's how you'll scale.
Understand what customers need, not necessarily what they want.
Drive clarity, right? Like you're trying to grow as quickly as you can. You have a limited number of resources. So based on what the customer says, drive clarity on what you're going to achieve.
All right, thank you all for such a great conversation. If you have any more questions, please make sure that you flag them down and ask them directly. They're amazing, and we've chatted beforehand, so this conversation I feel like could be for like hours and hours, but a round of applause for our panelists here today.